So the next speaker is joining us from the structural engineering industry. His name is Mark Cunliffe, and for the past 15 years, Mark has worked on he's worked on a plethora of different projects, and he started working in the building industry, and from starting as a traditional timber framer all the way to consultant structural engineer. Wasn't long before that passion for engineering took him around the world with work. And so he's worked in places across the Middle East. And for the last 6 years in particular, he's been working on a number of projects across Manchester. And Mark is also the chair of the Lancashire and Cheshire region for the iStruct-E. So Mark, without further ado, I'll invite you to take over the screen.
I just need to close a few windows here that are in my way slightly. That's great. Okay, well, yeah, thanks so much for having me. About me, my name's Mark. Thanks for that incredible introduction. Yes, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about me. First off, talk about observing the world and the things that I've observed in the world as I've gone on my career journey, and hopefully inspire you with a few things. I'm really going to encourage you to enjoy your careers and things, as most of you at the start, and just get that exploration attitude, which many of you have already started as having looked at careers in the engineering fields and the many engineering fields there are. And then I just want to end with a few thoughts about the future of engineering, and really perhaps some of those thoughts are not so much future as current, and dealing with the mistakes of yesteryear. So about me, and you know, it's great hearing from John some of his loves and things in the past. You know, exploring the garage with my dad and getting a hands-on with the tools and things is a huge part of me and my journey. But going to the beach, seeing the world there, and building sandcastles, and watching that sea come in, a high tide rise and destroy them. And whilst in some respects that could be very demoralizing at the end of you know, a hard day playing, I learned so much about the world, you know, about how natural forces, and actually how we need to work with the natural forces of the world as engineers, and as designers and as creators, and that these can think things we can try and work against them, but they're bigger and will not be able to beat them so much. So yes. But then as I went to university, and perhaps, you know, I don't want to share some of these photographs, but there you go. Inspired by no less than Brunel's Clifton Suspension Bridge in the background, which, you know, being a student, I decided to scale. And then, of course, interest in automation and things, and cars, historic cars especially. This is 1972 MG there as well. Have always given me that passion, that other outlet for engineering. I think, you know, some of you will have a huge amount of academic understanding, academic rigor around you now, having completed degree courses, or almost completed degree courses. Maybe the early professionals will be wondering where to go and what to do next. You know, it's not always straightforward, and I wasn't an academic. I wasn't very good at words and things. Hence, I started off doing my apprenticeship in timber framing. But nonetheless, I was encouraged to knuckle down and get some studies and learning behind me, which I did, and was very much inspired by the likes of Ted Happold, Michael Dixon, and those people, you know, just name dropping people that are dead now. But was inspired to go and join Bureau Happold after a few years of doing other things, which took my career through a whole series of things. Starting with the Theatre Royal, Bath, which is a grade 2 listed building, grade 2 star listed building, where I really learned how contractors like to take us for a ride, And actually, we've got to really know your scope and really understand what we're doing. I think that's a lot about what John was trying to communicate. And I imagine as we go through some of these talks and presentations today, we'll see loads of common themes. But hopefully you'll continue to learn them. Very, very quickly, I moved on to numerous projects in between, and I suppose these are a couple of the highlights. And I'll go into these a little bit more, or some of these in a bit more detail as we go through. But Shade in Qatar, a little bit of a taste of the Middle East. Just went there for a few site visits. But it was all about, for me, it was all about understanding the role of computation in engineering, which is always, since the 1970s, really, has been a huge, big thing. But as computation becomes more powerful, we're able to do so much more in optimizing shape and forms, generating efficiencies, and streamlining design processes, which are a huge tool in our belt, but should never be the only tool in our belt. And so after that, I needed to get back on site again, so and dig some big holes in the ground, which is what I always thought engineering was about, digging big holes in the ground. And went to De Vere Gardens in London and worked on another retained facade project, and built a residential building. All the time thinking, what next? And I think, we never know next, but I think you've always got to keep on having this momentum. And as I've mentioned before, I've got this interest in the Middle East, and lo and behold, this project with Gensler's came up to go and work in Qatar in the Middle East on a multi-billion-pound project. And for me, that was all about understanding the new culture there, understanding Qatar's history, understanding how different people act and behave and respond to things. But after several years there, I came back to the UK, moved up to Manchester, working with new UK contractors, leading a whole team, growing a team up there. Coventry Science Building, Halifax Peace Hall, one of those huge amount of lessons learned at Halifax Peace Hall on leadership, on building teams, on dealing with changing briefs and changes. 2018, I was really starting to explore the role of modular construction. Again, more efficiencies there, working using timber again, coming back to some of my grassroots there. And then more recently, a couple of highlights, Manchester Museum Courtyard project, one of the first cross-laminated timber projects in Manchester. Nowhere near the first in the world, but well-established material. But one of those materials we need to start using more, and we need to start exploring new materials of these things. It's great to hear concretine being talked about in the press recently on one of our projects. Campus, mixture of new build residential, new clients, new opportunities, and then the factory in Manchester. I'll gloss over those quickly because I'll cover those in a bit more detail later on. But as was mentioned, I'm involved with the Institution of Structural Engineers, and there's a nice segue. Whilst preparing for this talk, I was scrolling over some of Ted Happol's words. He was asked to talk at the 75th anniversary, so 25 years ago. And one of the things he said at the time, this is, like I say, 20 or so years ago. And so I quote him, "What is significant to anyone is that the tradition in which they grew. Our tradition represents values which we are not only relevant, but essential. And we have a duty to use them in partnership, not subvertently, but to achieve better construction standards." And I emphasize to achieve better construction standards. And secondly, that we have to recognize that which we have been taught is a method, not just information, but a method. And that understanding grows the problem, and we must adjust to this. Oh, I can't see my notes. My Zoom's in the place. Hang on, let's move this across. We must not define structural engineering too rigidly. It is not merely strength or deflection, but about fitness for purpose. So two things I just wanted to take from Ted as I start talking about the Institution of Structural Engineers is achieving better construction standards, and that engineering and design is about fitness for purpose. So I think to hold those things in your mind. So the Institution of Structural Engineers, I'm the regional chair for that, which is a sort of a year-long posting, because we like to keep the freshness going around there. The Institution of Structural Engineers is really about promoting safety in the public environment, in the public sector. But it's also the means by which people can become chartered engineers and become members of the Institution of Structural Engineering, which obviously promotes structural engineering in the built environment. I'm not only chair, I'm also involved in the sustainability panel there. And I think sustainability is a key thing, particularly at the moment as we talk about biodiversity and climate emergency. And hence, I say we've got to observe the world. Stephen Hawking, in his book, A Brief History of Time, writes near the very beginning that he was warned to put any equations in his book because every equation would chop his readership down by about 10,000 people. I think I was warned about putting graphs in presentations, but alas, I have done, and hopefully the number of listeners here doesn't drop off with it. And it's a normal distribution curve, which you've probably all seen thousands and thousands of times, but I really hope I can just give you a little bit of a new meaning to this and a really understanding the importance of it. Because everything we do as engineers is about observing things, and particularly observing them when they fail, when they go wrong. And this graph doesn't just represent collected data. It represents things that have gone wrong, things that have failed. And actually, failure is so important to what we do. If we don't fail things, if we don't push things to the limit and break them, we don't really understand them. It's the same with the sandcastles. They needed to fall down so we understood them. And it's the same with steel. We need to break it so we understand how strong it is. And it's only when things fail that we can collect the data and understand anything about it. And that's so important. We can become so afraid, I think, of failure. And actually, we just put margins of safety on things and margins of safety upon margins of safety. And we don't understand what's going on and what the behaviors are. And it's so important to do that. So the graph doesn't mean anything, it means many things, but per se, but I want it to always, when you see these curves, just to be reminded to not be afraid of failure, but to celebrate failure and to when you make mistakes, to embrace them, to share them, because it's very much with the mistakes we make and the failures that happen that innovation can happen, that new discoveries can be made, that your careers will advance. It's not the mistakes you make that define you, it's what happens next. It's what you do next. It's not the mistakes that you make that will define you, it's what happens next. And that, when you see this curve, is what I want you to think of in the future. Of course, I'm a structural engineer, so I feel very at risk here of talking about mechanical things as an aeroplane, with many more qualified people to talk about planes than I do. But I love this this image collected during the Second World War by naval analysts who were researching why so many of their bombers weren't coming home, and they decided what they would do is they would collect all the data from all the bullet holes, and they painstakingly recorded these, and they were able to produce the image which is before you, from which, of course, many of you will know the story, but I will remind you, please humour me. They decided, right, these are where the planes are getting hit the most, in these locations. At the tips of the wings, at the body of the chassis, on the tail, and this is where we must strengthen them. Of course, they were wrong, weren't they? And very much the places where they needed to strengthen them were the silent data here is the planes that didn't come home, which were the ones that were hit in the engines, the ones that were hit in the fuselage, the ones that were hit in the nose cones. But fortunately, they didn't just throw the data away. And this is where it's so important to read between the lines and think outside of the box, because all the data is here by virtue of the fact that it wasn't captured. So there is a silent data. So remember that too. So I move on to a slightly more somber tone at this point. Again, maintaining with my theme of observing the world, observing that which is before us. But remembering 2018, the Florida International Bridge collapse, all about engineers pushing the boundaries. And this might sound something of a paradox, where I'm encouraging you to push the boundaries and to understand failures, but then also understanding that failures can result in these things. But this is why we've got to think about quality as well. And I think there's lessons to be learned from COVID around quality, and I'll mention those briefly in a second. The Antwerp building collapse of 2019, the Surfside Consortium building, again, 2021. So far in 2021, there have been 16 structural failures of buildings. That's actually quite high. Typically, for the last few years, we've expected to see, globally this is, 8 to 10 bridges, buildings, structures of significant. Not all of them resulting in any injury or any death, but far too many of them resulting in loss of life. And we've got to think about that. And we've got to remember that this is an exciting place to move into engineering, in whatever field of engineering. It is a huge amount of value in what we do. And I think many of the clients around us forget that. And they think, bankers and doctors are, so much more integral to society. But as we well know from the Duke of Edinburgh, that engineering is so important and so fundamental to our societies. And let's not forget that. But let's not also be conned into thinking that these are modern day problems. Many engineer has been told in the past, as I have been many times, why is it that now engineers are making mistakes? They never used to make mistakes. And of course, again, we also know that this is not the case. We only need to go to BC 27 to see the Fidonia amphitheatre, which collapsed with the loss of, they estimate, up to 20,000 people with the collapse of that amphitheatre. And you're obviously aware of many other amphitheatres that collapsed. I love this image of the Camden Crescent in Bath. Many people know the Royal Crescent in Bath, which is the complete crescent. I don't know if my laser pen is pointing here.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Draw instead. There we go. Is the missing half of this is Camden Crescent. Many people think that they didn't complete it, but they did complete it. It fell down the hill 20 years after it had been completed. And so mistakes are made, and we must learn from those and capture that data. And again, Lincoln Cathedral does not have its spires on it, and had several collapses during its time. So we go through many stormy seas of our lives, and there's many stormy processes through our careers. There are ups and downs. I mentioned before that I struggled academically and failed many exams to get there. To join the iStruct, you have to submit an exam as well, and I'm not ashamed to say that I failed that a number of times too. And the word of learning here is that sometimes things are tough, and things that are worth getting are often tough. But learn from your mistakes and carry on persisting at those things. Have a plan, but don't be afraid for that to change. Read the data, observe the world around you, and move on from it. Enjoy and explore life, the world around you. So many opportunities will come your way, maybe to change companies, maybe to change career, maybe to change profession. It's never too late. Don't be afraid of stepping. I remember being faced, would I become a mechanical engineer? Would I go automated? I followed my heart. And this is my advice to many people, to follow your heart and to take opportunities when they're presented. So when the opportunity came to go to Doha came upon me, I did. I moved there. And herein lies one of the real reasons that I love engineering is the transformation. I'll swap back and forth through these few slides a few times. But this is what we started off. This is when I moved to Doha. in 2012. We've just completed the, in fact, this must be a bit after that. This must be whatever. So I moved in 2012. We hadn't even completed excavating. So what you're looking here is a 5-story deep basement. It's so huge that you can barely observe the depth of the basement here, but it's a very, very, very deep basement with a piled foundation. And what we did over the course of 10 years, really, 8 years, was transform it into this. Something that's tangible, something that you can see, something that I can take my kids to go and explore and see, something that they did, something that we did, something that changed the world, and very much with the brief of this project, made the world a better place. So you're looking at a site here that's a multi-billion-pound project. These are some of the exciting opportunities that are out there in the world, in the UK, overseas, to design multiple buildings, to build multiple buildings, to think about sustainable strategies. Now we've got a specific energy centre on this site to enable all the buildings to operate as efficiently as they could in generating heat and cooling for all of the buildings. We create an underground labyrinth to enable cars and vehicles to come off the streets. As much about removing vehicles from the streets is about creating safety and about enabling the shops to be stocked during the days with lorry routes under the ground there, fully thought through, very carefully detailed, and then beautifully executed. And this is where it's never just one person. These are the results of multiple teams coming together, architects, engineers, having great visions to see a huge number of different projects and different opportunities and things. Numbers of things went wrong on these projects, but we pursue and we go through and we become better people. And sometimes it's not about just the projects. Here we're creating a new centre of culture, and I learned a huge amount about how different people work, how different cultures behave, what inspires different people. And you learn more about yourself on these journeys as well. And I think that's one thing I would capture before going on to the next project, is that what you know about yourself now, it may not change in the future, and that's okay. Embrace it. Don't be afraid to start exploring different things, and for those things, have goals, have visions, but be educated and be informed as you develop. Don't worry if you don't know where your career is going right now. Just take that first step, because it's going to be exciting. It's going to be enjoyable. As I said before, oh, and these slides are the wrong way around. Anyway, so here we go. Factory, Manchester. One of the undoubtedly most complicated projects I have worked on to date. We have a theatre, a cultural venue for Manchester International Festival, which is currently being built on site. We'll call it box-in-box construction. The idea being to have acoustically isolated boxes, so that when you make music, when you make sound inside, or when there's a noise outside, the noise is not readily transferable from outside to inside or from inside to outside. What complicates this venue slightly more is we have a 2,000 seat theatre next to a 5,000 capacity performance venue, and very much with Manchester International Festival's vision. They want two very different events to be able to occur next to each other. So not only do we have a carefully designed shell that's sat on acoustic bearings, we have very heavy doors that are mounted on bearings that are able to separate that, pairs of doors in fact. And this I'm sure will be the subject of another talk sometime soon. And again, with this building, perilously close to the river, right against the side of train tracks, and sitting on top of grade 2 again listed arches. One of the things we had to do with the arches is lift them slightly, which has taken months and months of planning and engineering and design to jack them, to remove some of the bricks and to replace them slightly, which is fantastic. Sorry, I make it sound like we lifted the whole arches. We didn't lift the whole arches. We propped them and we removed some layers of bricks, some courses of bricks, to create the extra head height, which is always an interesting experience when they've done that. So we're in the middle of that at the moment. But these are some of the opportunities that go when you start exploring these things. And to find these sort of solutions, there is no standard approach. There is no rule book. There are rules. Newton's observed many of them. But again, if we can go back to what we describe as first principles, you have the confidence to build, you have the confidence to design. Go back to first principles, go back to your understanding of the known world, of what you've observed around you, and build those into things. Don't be afraid to question. We were told we couldn't alter these arches. It was too complicated. We were told we couldn't put cladding on acoustic bearings. No one's done that before in this way. You see we have reverse slung concrete panels there. It was very complicated to lift those into position. But there's a way when you think about these things. There are answers out there, but also don't be afraid of asking questions, because some of these bigger problems, if you have the answers to, you're in the wrong profession and they're not paying you enough. Because then no one person rarely has all of the answers. And I'll touch on this again. Collaboration. I personally believe it's absolutely fundamental as a way forward. I don't just mean that it needs to happen between teams working on the same project. I think we need to think broader. And I'll explain my thoughts on that in a moment. I like leaving these cliffhangers. The last project I'm going to touch on here is a project called Campus, which is again in Manchester, or one particular building here. This is the old university building, Manchester School of Business, which is now being converted into a residential building. It was earmarked for demolition, and they were going to replace it with a similar tower block, because this one didn't have enough floors on it, and they needed to have more floors to achieve the residential capacity and requirements. But we thought, well, hang on a minute, this building's got some life left in it, and sure enough, we did the numbers. And it did have some life in it, and we were able to add another 3 stories of building on top of this, saving not only the building but all the embodied carbon associated with the destruction of the building, which had just been embodied carbon that went to the landfill, and the need to bring in new concrete, new steel to do that, which I think is something that we all need to be very, very conscious of when we approach building design these days. And as you do that, you're going to be presented with extra challenges. So one of the challenges when we did peel back the building, we discovered that completely undocumented, there'd been a significant fire on one of the floors, which you can see there by all the black concrete. And they'd done some repair work to it with some spraycrete, the effectiveness of which we had absolutely no idea. After much scratching our heads about how we could do detailed analytical methods to calculate this, we decided that the best thing to do was to put some swimming pools on top, fill them up with water, and load test the whole structure. We were expecting a couple of millimeters of movement, but we observed absolutely no movement whatsoever. So there was not only adequate capacity for the new loads that we're going to be doing there. There's obviously plenty of residual capacity, which in a way wasn't a surprise, because the great premise of our being able to save this building is as an original university building. It'd been designed, many of these were lecture rooms designed to be absolutely crammed full of students. And the reality is now, as residential buildings, much of the floor plate will be empty. You know, and even when they are sort of at capacity, you know, you have much lighter things in them. So that's how we've been able to sort of add the extra stories as well through that. So I'm conscious of time, as we always are with these things. Moving on to the future of engineering, what happens next? And this is where I start to talk about collaboration again. But really just think about this new movement that's happening at the moment. Engineers declare biodiversity emergency. And I don't think it's an understatement to use the word emergency. I think some of the press that goes around this is perhaps misguided, but this is nonetheless an absolutely essential issue that we all need to be thinking about. It's great designing things, it's great doing things, but we need to have a connection to what has happened next, to our thoughts about the future, to our thoughts about what we need to, you know, the consequences of things. I said earlier, follow your heart. And absolutely, that is my number one piece of career advice. Follow your heart. Nobody wants to be doing a job that is boring, that is dull. And trust me, if you follow it, you know, your heart in engineering, you will not have a dull life. There will not be a day that doesn't present you challenges. They might cause you great upset and stress. In fact, I hope they do, because it's when you come out of those that you realise that you're a better person for them. But sometimes that can feel like following your heart, building these gold-plated projects and designs is actually contrary to the climate emergence. And there's this huge tension pulling the things apart. Well, what do I do? Where do I go? But do they need to always pull in opposite directions? My challenge to you, my challenge to myself is, why are they pulling? Surely the two should align, because the very element of sustainability is about leaving something for a future generation, to make sure that you're always adding something that's genuinely there. See, if you're truly following your heart, you're interested in sustaining your own self. And some of the things we do are inherently destructive, self-destructive. And we need to change our mindset. We need to have a growth mindset, a sustainable mindset, and realize that these things don't pull in other directions. And when we realize these, we need to take stock and reroute ourselves. And so my last adage is to follow your heart, but to take your brain with you. And then I believe that the stormy seas of life might be slightly more tranquil. Thank you for your time.